Hello and welcome to this session. So in this session, we'll talk about some of the important questions on Sqoop. Okay, you can also use this as a refresher if you want to refresh your topics on Sqoop. You can use this video as well. So this will be very useful for that purpose as well. So let's get started. So the first question that we have is, why are you using Sqoop, right? So this is a very common question that is been asked in multiple interviews. So you can basically say, so the data that is available is in our RDBMS, maybe your MySQL or Oracle, and we want to migrate this data into our HDFS. So for that purpose, we are using Sqoop to import the data faster and efficiently. And there may be a follow-up question like, hey, you can do this migration without Sqoop also, right? Yes, there are different ways you can do this migration. Now you can always write an application to connect to the RDBMS, and then you can ingest the data into HDFS. Sqoop can easily do this. It can easily integrate with the RDBMS. It can easily integrate with HDFS. So it is much faster and much easier. So that is why we use Sqoop. Okay, so if they ask you to give a command, so this is your command. So you have Sqoop import, and this is for import. Then connect, you give the connection here, a host name, port name, database name, you have username, the password, the number of mappers, the table, what is the target directory. So this is the template for your Sqoop import. And what is the significance of M? So M is basically mappers. So mappers, what it does is it enables a parallel processing. Okay, so instead of performing the entire process using a single process, so here I mentioned mapper as one. So what it does is only one process is used to perform this Sqoop input. But you can always use a number of mappers, so you can put it 2. That means 2 process will do this Sqoop input. So if basically the load is being shared equally, so your performance will be much faster, right? And what is the default mapper size? Now the default mapper size is 4, but you can always increase it as per the scenario. Okay, so again, how much can you increase, right? You cannot increase infinitely, so there is a limit. Okay, so it depends upon the open connections that are available in the database. So if your database has only 60 connections, the maximum you can utilize is that much, right? How many mappers you have used in the project? Again, you can say any number here. Now I'm just taking 4 here for example, because I have a follow-up question like, why you're using 4? Why can't you increase to a higher number, let's say 40 or something? Now why we are using a less number? Because again, this is very specific to a project. So in your project you may use a small number. So it could be because there are many jobs that hit the same database, so you are using a Sqoop query to hit that database, but there may be other jobs that it has the same database. So if it has like 20 open connections, 10 may be already occupied somewhere, 2 may be already occupied somewhere. So to make sure that every job has equal opportunity, we basically, this is something which is in many cases the architect decides or the team lead decides, right? So crucial jobs will get more mappers assigned, but other jobs will have a significant value, whatever be decided in the project. Now, how do you protect your password? So here I basically said you can give the password. It's not a good practice. So you have to protect your password. So there are 2 ways. One, you can basically use ---- password file. You can give the password location and you can store this password here. Second is you can basically encrypt the password. So you can encrypt this password using JSX. You can use this command to encrypt the password, and then this is a Sqoop command that uses the encrypted password. So these are the 2 ways. Second one is more preferred because it is an encrypted one, but I have also seen projects use the first method as well. Now, how do you filter the data that is been imported from Sqoop? So if you do a Sqoop import on a table, it will give you all the data, but how do you filter? I don't want all the data, right? So I want just few data. So there you can use hyphen hyphen where clause. So here I am saying customer state is equal to tx. So only those data whose customer state is tx, only those data will be imported. Rest of the data will not be imported. You can also add columns here. Let's say instead of pulling all the columns, I just want few columns. So you can basically say hyphen hyphen columns, and you can give the column names here. And if you want to write a query, you can use a free from query. So you can say hyphen hyphen query. You can basically write your select query here. So this is how you can limit the data that is being imported. Now what is the default delimiter while importing? So the default is comma. When you import the data from Sqoop, it will be comma delimiter. But you can always make this change. You can change the default delimiter. So for this you have to add an option fields terminated by. So here I am saying fields terminated by pipe. So the data will be imported and the delimiter would be pipe. Now before importing, I want to check the data. What to do? So I don't want to just import data. I want to first verify or just do a simple select queries or whatever. So two things. One, you can log into your database. Let's say if you have MySQL database, you can log into the database, you can run your commands, verify, and then you can do the scooping. Or if you don't have direct access to MySQL, the software is not available, what you can do is you can use something called a scoop eval. So when you use a scoop eval, so you can basically work as if you're doing the query or firing the query in your database. So if I say scoop eval here, this command, what it does is it will execute this query and it will show you the result. So this is very similar as like logging into your MySQL or something and doing select query. Instead, we are using scoop eval for scoop command. So how do you import the data incrementally? So important question. So for that, again, you have to use the options incremental append. Then you have to use check column. So now check column is like on what column you want to check if it is a new data, right? So here I'm saying I want to save the customer ID. And then what is the last value? Last value is what is the last value that we have imported? So here when I say last value is 0, which means or next time when the scoop churn runs, import all the data whose customer ID is greater than 0, right? So that is how you can do it incremental. Now with this process, what will happen every time you will have to make the change. So let's say I have imported 100, then you have to again change this last value to 100. That way the next time it will import from 101. But this is not really good, right? So we have to automate it. So how do you automate it? You create a scoop job. The same thing, you just say scoop job and then all the other same command you put it here. Now what scoop job will do is when it runs, it will basically store this last value which is updated into the metadata. So let's say today it has read all 100 records. The last value will be updated to 100 in the metadata. So next time it will run from 101. Some additional comments on the scoop job. So let's say if you want to show the job details, scoop job hyphen show, this is the job name. To see what are the available jobs, scoop job hyphen list. If you want to delete it, scoop job hyphen delete, and then give the job name. My job is the name of the scoop job. I have 100 tables. I want to import 98 of them. So basically all the tables except for 2. So you do an exclude. So you say exclude tables, whatever tables you want to exclude, you put it here and then you use warehouse directory, right? So if you see here from all our previous case, we are using target directory, but here we are using warehouse directory, right? So what is the difference? So basically target directory is used for a particular directory in HTML, just only one directory, but you use warehouse directory to specify the parent directory of the scoop job. So what will happen is in this case under the parent directory, Sqoop will create directory with the same name as table. So here we are importing 98 tables, right? So warehouse directory, what it does is it will create a directory user Cloudera their tables. Under this it will create 98 folders. Each folder will have the table name. So 98 folders will be created for 98 tables. So that's the difference between your warehouse directory target. Target is for a specific folder or a specific directory. Warehouse is basically parent directory under which scoop job will create lot more directories. What is data serialization? Serialization is a process of converting a data structure of an object into a format that can be easily stored or transmitted. So let's say you have a data here. So this is my data. So let's say John is my data, right? Now what we can do is we can convert this data into another format which is unreadable, right? So you can compress this data and stuff. This is your data, same data John is compressed like this. So this process is called as serialization. Now why serialization is important? Because serialized data are easy to transmit over a network, right? So basically this data is easy to get transmitted over a network. It will be fast and it offers good compression. They can be encrypted also. This can be compressed, which means you save the space while you are sending the data over the network, and it can be encrypted, which means it can be securely sent. So that those are the advantages of serialization. Deserialization also does not take time. So when you want to read this data, right, you cannot read this data like, you have to convert this data back to this data John. So this process is called as deserialization. So deserialization is also very easy. So that's why most of our projects on big data, they use serialized file formats. Okay. And what are some of the serialized file formats? You have sequence, RC, ORC, Avro, Parquet. Now, sequence or RC are something which is kind of extinct. ORC, Avro, Parquets are something which use very regularly. And we look at some of the differences here. So Avro is a row format, ORC and Parquet are columnar format. So Avro is row, ORC, Parquet is columnar. And Avro is write heavy, ORC and Parquet are read heavy. So in all these file formats, along with the data, schema will also be there, right? So in these files from one machine, and you can load it into another machine, and you will know what data is about. So the metadata will be present. All these file formats can be split across multiple disks. Therefore, scalability and processing is not an issue. So that's one great thing. If you talk about compression, ORC provides maximum compression, then followed by Parquet and then by Avro. And if the schema keeps changing, then Avro is preferred. Let's say you have 6 columns today, tomorrow it will be like 7 columns, after that it will be 10 columns. So if the schema keeps changing, then you can use Avro. ORC also supports schema has changed to some extent, but Avro is the most preferred one, it's the best. So Avro is used, like I said, if the schema is changing. So applications like Kafka, it is used. Parquet most commonly in Spark, and ORC in Hive. Now because the compression of ORC is more, you can save a lot of space. Query time is to be a little bit more because it has to decompress the data. So in case of Avro, time efficiency would be good. And in case of, if you want to save space, as I mentioned, use ORC, but if you have to process the data, nested data, then use Spark. What is columnar storage? When to use it? So let's take an example. This is a traditional data. You have ID, name, state, and age. So one row data is stored, after that another row data, another. This is how you store the data in your blocks, right? This is a traditional way. Now the same data, if you want to store in a column, what happens is all the columns, let's say all the IDs, you see all the ID 1, 2, 3 will be stored first, then all the names will be stored, all the state, and then all the age. So all the columns data, same column name data will be stored in the same data node. So what is the advantage? So let's say if you want to query ID, so all the data is present right here. I don't have to scan other columns, right? So that's why it is an advantage. So typically if you are doing some aggregates, so you don't have to get all the data, you just want few columns data, right? So that's where your columnar format comes in handy. What is the disadvantages? For any new inserts, it cannot be inserted at the last block, rather it must be inserted in the same block where the data is stored. So the byte memory has to be pushed. So let's say if I have to send ID columns, I cannot add it here at the last, I have to add it right here. So that memory allocation has to happen. So that's where this is a disadvantage. Okay, so I'm getting connection failure exception during connecting to MySQL from Sqoop. So what could be the issue? And it could be many issues. Maybe there is a lack of permissions to use a MySQL database. So we can try different commands like to confirm if the MySQL database has permission. So these are some commands. If let's say if there is no permissions, then you can use grant to provide permissions. What is the significance of split by clause in Apache Sqoop? So you might have seen split by clause being used in some of the things, so you can see the split by here, right? So it is splitting the data by customer ID. So what is the significance of that? So see, split by is a clause. It is used to specify the columns of the table which are helping to generate splits of data input during importing. This clause specifies the columns and helps to improve the performance via parallelism. It also helps to specify the column that has even distribution. So basically, you need something to split the data into different nodes when you're using number of mappers more than one. So that is where the split by clause comes into the picture. What is scoop validation? So basically to validate the data that is copied, so you have the data in your let's say MySQL, you are importing it to Hadoop, right? HDFS. So you need to validate that. That is your scoop validation. How do you do it? You can count the number of source records, right? You can count how many records were there in MySQL, how many records are there in your target HDFS. So it means to validate the data copied, either import or export by comparing the row counts as I mentioned from source to target. Likewise, we use this option to compare the row counts between source as well as the target just after the data is imported into HDFS. So you can use this. And moreover, while during the imports, all the rows are deleted or added, Sqoop tracks all these changes and it can update in the log file. So that's what your Sqoop validation is. I have null in few columns in the MySQL. While importing, I want to give some default value to this nulls, right? So for that, you can use null string. So null string is basically any column which is a string column in MySQL, varchar or char. Those column, if it is null, then you can give some data. Let's say you can use some default data for those null values. So similarly for null string like numbers, you can use some other default data. So this is what you have to add in your scoop command. For scoop export, this is the scoop export command. You will have an export here, that connections, username, password, everything. You will have something called a staging table. Now we create a staging table with the same structure as the target. Scope will first export the data into the staging table and from staging table into the target table. After this, staging table is deleted. Now reason for staging is that if there is a connection loss between HDFS RTMS, data is lost. So staging table should be in the same database as a target. So that's where the staging is important, because it wants to make sure you copy the data correctly from your HDFS into the target database. I have MySQL imported data from MySQL HDFS. Now I have another application that runs on the HDFS. If some updates happen on this HDFS, I want to update that into the MySQL. Okay, so what the interview is asking is like he's having a MySQL database. Now he is importing using Sqoop, importing HDFS. Now what is happening is somehow some other applications is running on this HDFS. There are some changes into that HDFS, right? So you want to make sure you want to update that into MySQL. So for that, you use this one update mode. You're saying that you want to, what is the mode? You want to just do the updates, and what is the key? Based on what key between your MySQL and HDFS. So you have to provide that key. In this case, I provided customer ID. Okay, and Sqoop performance. There are certain performance tuning tips that you can do, like you can for imports you can increase the number of mappers. You can use a connection option called as hyphen direct. So what happens if you use direct is, now instead of using the JDBC, it will directly use a native library. So for MySQL is MySQL DOM, Postgres PG DOM. So the native directory is provided for only MySQL and Postgres. So if you're using Oracle, you can't use direct. So if you're importing from Oracle, you can't use direct. JDBC is third party. So when you connect to the third parties, it will be a little slow, but if you connect with the native connections, it will be performance improvement. So that's one of the things that you can use. Fetch size basically tells you how many rows should each mapper fetch at a time. So by default it is 1000 rows, but you can change it. Like here I'm changing it to much bigger value. Okay, so all this data will be brought into the memory and then it will be committed to the hard disk. So this is one of the things you can do. For Sqoop exports, there are two things you can do. In Sqoop export, 10,000 rows will be inserted per Sqoop command by default. Okay, so we can tune this using the below properties, like export statement per transaction, export records per statement. So by default these are 100 which would be 10,000. Now what does export records per statement, what does that mean? This property will tell you how many rows are inserted per insert statement, right? So if you are firing one insert statement, how many rows are inserted? In this case 100. Now export statements per transaction, this property will tell you how many insert statements are fired. So like here I'm firing 100 insert statements. Each insert statement is updating 100 records. So 100 into 100, 10,000 rows are fired. So you can make this change as well for export performance tuning. All right, so these are the interview questions that we have. I hope this is helpful to you. Thanks for watching, and please do let us know if there are any other question that comes in the interview questions in the comment section. It will be very helpful. Thank you for watching and all the best for your interview preparation.